Persistence in politics can also pay off as well. President Donald Trump gave the State of the Union address, an annual requirement for the President of the United States to provide Congress with an update of the State of the United States. Now, I am not a real big fan of watching the speech, regardless of who the president is, or even watching the rebuttal. I usually prefer to read the transcripts to see the claims as well as the agenda laid out for the upcoming year. First, I will give my thoughts of the overall speech, which was the longest speech on record. Politically, I think it was a strategically genius approach. The theme was focused on celebrating America and incorporating recent current events that filled Americans with pride. Also, President Trump was effective in using the theme to create a stark contrast between those who love and celebrate America, and those who cannot set aside their political hatred for even a moment to enjoy non-political moments. Now, the substance. Naturally, the State of the Union address will always focus on the positive for the person delivering it. No president is going to stand up there and tell people what the opposition wants to hear. President Trump highlighted his efforts to restore the American economy, rebalance trade through the tariffs, end foreign wars, and bring safety to American communities that were plagued with violence. Going forward, Trump laid out plans to further efforts to fight waste, corruption, and fraud in the federal government, tasking Vice President J.D. Vance to lead the effort. Another popular approach is ending insider trading by members of Congress while working to expand opportunity through investing. Trump also made strong arguments for the SAVE Act, calling for it to be enacted, as Americans support the ideas contained in the bill. One thing that I think was notable was Trump pointing out how his opposition uses buzzwords in their attacks, but it really applies to them. He called them out for making the term affordability center on attacks. Yet, Joe Biden and congressional Democrats were the sole group responsible for the inflation and cost hikes Americans faced, and he pointed out his policies were fixing it. Overall, the first year of the second term has been extremely consequential for the overall good for Americans and our national interests. Americans support the idea of securing our border and removing the criminal entrants from our society. They support the idea of rebalancing trade and fixing our trade issues. They support reducing costs, ending lawfare, and restoring law and order. Americans support reversing the trans ideology that has harmed so many. Americans want to be able to drive the car of their choice, whether it be gas or electric. They do not want a government edict forcing their hand. Americans want to speak their mind without the government censoring them, or reserving speech for only the political elite. American citizens support the idea that job creation is finally giving them opportunities rather than diverting opportunity to lower cost and illegally entered competition. Americans like the fact that our government is focused on them, not placing the interests of the worst members in our society above the good hard-working taxpayers. In many ways, Trump has been lockstep with the people on the issues. But there have been some challenges with the approaches. The tariffs have been an issue for American importers who have made a living bringing in goods and services made overseas with cheap and sometimes questionable labor practices. They will bear the cost for the transition to an increased level of domestic production. The Supreme Court of the United States gave the opposition a fleeting victory, striking down the global tariff because of the law used to justify them. Minutes later they were reinstated under a different law, following the guidance that was also contained in the decision. An expected response, which still raises some issues. As I have noted in the past, my hope was that tariffs would be used on the greatest offenders, like China, Brazil, and Russia, and treat our allies and partners a bit kinder up front. Understandably, sometimes there needs to be an incentive for change in order to convince the side benefiting to change course, and we cannot deny the beneficial results that have come out of the campaign. Americans support free trade overall, but we cannot deny the ill effects from globalization and the reality that free trade is more of an illusion at the moment than reality. There are tariffs, protectionism in the form of market caps, competitive product bans, and emergency brakes that restrict trade. Some foolishly believe that it is a result of quality issues, but it is simply protectionism. Another issue that was a crux of the return of Trump was the crisis around illegal immigration that negatively impacted our communities, diverting massive funds away from legal taxpayers towards illegals not contributing but taking. The effort to clearly impact the federal census, which will impact the allocation of congressional leaders and federal funds. Consider the massive effort to blur the immigration status of people getting government services, driver licenses, and registering for programs. Yet these same people wanted to track vaccine status. If you were a sympathizer for illegals, would you not want the data to tout how many you supposedly helped or impacted? No, because they know they were doing wrong. A nation no longer protects the interests and security of its citizens without a secure border, an orderly system where immigrants apply for entry, are vetted for safety and economic concerns, and then are either allowed or rejected as needed. Anyone violating that process should by default be removed. That is not controversial, completely reasonable. If you enter someone's home without permission, You do not have the right to stay until it is convenient for the intruder to leave. The homeowner has the right to remove intruders from the property they paid for, pay taxes on, and not have their personal property rights impeded. If you are trespassing, then you are by default committing a criminal act and a criminal. There is no rational argument to allow for open borders and illegal immigration. That is a false argument by default, and the proponents of that position are deceiving the public. America is a nation of immigrants and supports immigration. That is why we have an immigration system for people to follow. We are also a nation of laws, and do not support people violating our laws to reap benefits they are not entitled. The issue for many is the optics, which is largely due to progressive politicians using the fringe as pawns, and idiotically having them interfere with law enforcement operations and harass those that the government employs to enforce the rules enacted. Imagine if conservatives harassed those 87,000 armed tax collectors Biden sought to take revenue to fund open border cost. The Trump plan was actually reasonable. Focus removal on the worst offenders and those illegals that associate with them. Work with states to facilitate orderly transfers. For states that are harboring criminals, use strategic force to apprehend them. The events in Minnesota were 100% on the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis. Luckily, they finally realized the error of their ways. Making our cities safe should not be controversial. For too long, liberals managed crime stats to make it look like they were doing their jobs. Rather than arresting criminals, they played around with reporting or simply did not charge based on demographics. All the while, people were still victimized. Ironic that the political party that views everyone as a victim did not protect actual victims as much as they went all out for the criminal who harmed them.